Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is an action role-playing game that was released exclusively for PlayStation 5 on February 29, 2024 and on PC last January 23, 2025. As a second chapter of Square Enix's ambitious remake trilogy, Rebirth takes us beyond Midgar's walls into a vast open world filled with possibilities. After spending more than 200 hours playing both the PS5 and PC versions, I've experienced everything this game has to offer, from its stunning vistas and engaging storytelling to its deepest secrets and dynamic combat system. The real question is, what is the actual performance on PC? Is the hefty $70 price tag justified? And ultimately, is this game for you? Whether you are a devoted fan of the original or completely new to the series, these are the questions we'll be answering in this comprehensive review. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth picks up after FF7 Remake's dramatic conclusion following Cloud and his companions' escape from Midgar. The party is warned to track down Sephiroth and ultimately stop his menacing plans to endanger the planet. Once again, we're thrown into a conflict that goes far beyond fighting the Shinra Corporation. It's a tale about humanity's dark nature and impact on the planet itself, wrapped in layers of political intrigue, personal struggles, and looming threat of Sephiroth. What makes it fascinating is how it blends these serious topics with a world that masterfully combines fantasy and sci-fi elements. You'll find yourself wandering through medieval-style villages one moment, then stumbling upon high-tech facilities and locations the next. This contrast creates a unique atmosphere that becomes iconic to the series. The character development here is nothing short of exceptional. Cloud and the party will meet familiar faces from Remake along with new ones, each bringing their distinct personalities and goals to the table. The relationship system adds another layer of depth, letting you strengthen bonds through side activities and meaningful dialogue. These relationships influence certain story outcomes, including who becomes your date at the Gold Saucer, which is a nice touch that rewards players' investment in these character connections. As someone who grew up with these characters, seeing them brought to life with such detail and care is nothing short of amazing. The script has been modernized while maintaining the spirit of the original. Subtle jokes and character interactions land perfectly, never feeling forced or too contemporary. The high-quality cutscenes make every character moment memorable, and the voice acting adds layer of depth to each personality. When it comes to pacing, Rebirth strikes a decent balance between linear storytelling and open-world freedom. The game opens up around the 4-hour mark, and from there, you're free to explore at your own pace. Keep in mind that doing open-world activities or exploration is not mandatory. You can easily skip the side content if you want to focus on the main scenario or keep the narrative intact without in fear of missing anything. And yes, you heard it right. Most of the expanded content for the original game adds meaningful depth, especially how the added flavors on each important event were done right and even made the whole narrative more cohesive. However, I did encounter some sections that felt like a necessary filler. There are minigames that you can skip entirely, even if it's part of the main story, but some are not. These fillers are so dragging and unnecessary at times. Especially there's a scene where players will be controlling a specific character to navigate a certain location to solve mini puzzles. I dedicated a separate section for minigames and the overall level progression, which I will dive into more later on, as these two are one of the biggest topics when playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Although I have celebrated most of the story aspects of Rebirth, I do have some reservations about the whole story's direction that Square Enix planned for this trilogy. Without spoiling anything, the introduction of alternate timelines and certain plot elements feels unnecessarily convoluted. I prefer the straightforward approach of the original narrative. I have mixed feelings seeing characters who already passed come back into the scenes. However, since this is just part 2 and a lot of things can happen, I'll reserve my final judgment until part 3. But judging from how the story's direction after playing parts 1 and 2, there is a possibility that the rumors of the game having multiple endings is not a stretch. The good thing is that the game's original story elements and the carefully expanded character development still provided a compelling experience. Since I do have my reservations and still waiting for part 3, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will get an 8.5 score for the story and setting for now. The PC version of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a visual masterpiece that takes the already impressive PS5 version to new heights. Let's break down exactly what makes it special. The character models are stunning, particularly during dialogue scenes where you can see every subtle facial expressions. from realistic eye movements, facial blemishes, and realistic textures to immersive motion captures. You can see how they paid attention to designing each character model, and they stood out even more in the PC version. The majority of the effort went into these models, which is expected since the main selling point of this series is its characters. With that being said, NPCs or regular models can be distracting at times since the difference in quality is night and day, which I guess can't be helped. Additionally, Square Enix did not snooze on their level design as well. Final Fantasy VII's world theme is an interesting one, so they made sure that it will not be wasted due to poor level design quality. Especially in towns and key locations, they are sprawling with activities. From a visual standpoint, town level designs is top-notch. Just like in the remake, I tend to appreciate the convenient true-to-life layouts of towns, and I made sure to spend the time exploring the nook and crannies of it. Towns are not enormous per se, and each town has its own decent size, but the layouts make each town stand out. The additional environmental details like steam vents, chimneys, intricate air conditioning system, complex housing placements, and more added a lot to the immersion, making Rebirth's world feel alive and relatable. That's just towns, but what about open world or spaces? If towns are looking great so far, how much more does the sprawling and alive open world Rebirth offers? As soon as the first open world area starts, players will see how gorgeously the world of Final Fantasy VII was crafted. Square Enix managed to capture each region's feel and unique designs. If you played the original, every region is going to be a visual treat, from not just how it looks, but the landscape was designed or the layout was done right. Players will be exploring diverse environmental themes, from vast green open fields, swampy areas, deserts, open seas, and rocky terrains. And exploring each of these regions was nothing but an enjoyable experience in my case. When it comes to the overall graphical improvements, the environment is much richer now thanks to the PC's power. On the PS5 version, the environment lacks detail and oftentimes suffers from a lot of popping issues and poor textures. Prioritizing the main character models makes it look uneven and can be distracting at times. The PC version somehow fixed these major issues. Open world landscapes, city spaces, and key locations receive a major overhaul, making their details stand out as well, especially when playing under ultra settings. Although it is still not perfect and players can see some rough edges, unless you look for the said blemishes, it is unnoticeable. Some of the noticeable improvements of the PC version compared to the PS5 are as follows. The technical improvements are substantial across the board. The late loading of textures that plagued the PS5 version was completely improved. However, it is far from perfect and expect to encounter this issue still occasionally. The visuals suffer greatly even on character models when playing on PS5 when under performance sharp mode, wherein the overall visuals will lose their sharpness greatly and make everything blurry just to maintain the 60 frames per second performance. It is greatly disappointing and takes away one of the greatest strengths of the game, which is top-notch graphic fidelity. Great thing that the PC version expectedly saved the game from its previous poor performance. But the best improvement that I have seen so far is the lighting improvements that the developers were so keen to showcase on their trailers. You can see that they paid attention to this as there were a lot of locations that looks differently as if they were completely different locations compared to the PS5 version. I enjoyed this location a lot compared to the first time I visited them when playing on PS5. The new lighting improvements put new life to these locations. Not just in locations, but it makes the gorgeous character models feels even more alive and eye candy, making them stand out more. The UI on the other hand is clean and intuitive, never getting in the way of the gorgeous visuals, and I do appreciate this kind of design, since overcomplicated UIs tend to distract the player. The sound design overall deserves a special mention. The attention to detail is simply remarkable. You can hear Cloud's equipment clanking as he runs, environmental objects buzzing and humming, and combat sounds that packed a real punch. The sound design added greatly to the immersion, especially in combat. Attack animations feel satisfying and the physical impacts and explosions were greatly enhanced, thanks to the top-notch sound design. Additionally, let's not forget how well the voice acting was performed, at least on the main characters. It is expected though so since Square Enix pays great attention to their cast when breathing life into their main characters. But one of the greatest feats of Rebirth, or rather the whole Final Fantasy series, is its phenomenal soundtracks. From epic orchestral arrangements, which elevate especially boss battles, to ambient themes that set the perfect mood when exploring the world, or emphasizing key cutscenes for effective storytelling. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth won the Best Score in Music award in the 2024 Game Awards, and it was rather expected and obvious given how the overall sound design was presented. However, there is one notable issue with the sound design. The balance between dialogue and background music in the cutscenes was poorly handled. I had to manually lower the BGM levels in the settings to hear the conversations. Unfortunately, this issue persists in the PC version as well and hasn't been addressed since release. There is no question that Rebirth performed in the overall presentation department, and it will receive a score of 9.4 in our book. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is not all about graphical fidelity, as it is packed with engaging and balanced story progression, while giving the player the avenues to participate in open-world exploration or engage in a dynamic combat system. The world of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is divided into 7 regions. The story progresses linearly, then throws a player into open-world maps and let them explore after the said 3 to 4 hour mark. When it comes to map size, Rebirth's regions are not as massive as Elden Ring's base game map or like the other staple open-world titles, but the size of each region felt just right, especially when talking about its sheer size. Each region can be explored somewhere around 3 to 5 hours while activating points of interest, gathering raw materials for crafting, and hunting treasures along the way. The overall open-world exploration loop was addicting in my case, as unlocking each type of node or point of interest provided a sense of progression. I simply cannot stress how refreshing Rebirth's exploration is compared to Remake, since Part 1 focused on Midgar's events. However, there will still be areas like dungeons and special locations that have linear layouts, so players will be traversing between linear locations and areas that are open as they progress. Also, these areas will have your usual Remake progression trope, like interacting with cliffs, crawling through tight spaces, or solving mini puzzles. It took me hours to understand the exploration loop of Rebirth, but once it clicked, I found myself wanting to explore each region more and unlock points of interest. As the player progresses in different regions, you will unlock various types of mounts, primarily different breeds of chocobos, each with unique abilities. One can climb mountains, another one excels at sea travel, and more. Not only that, there are even special mounts that add their flavor to exploration. These mounts are faithfully recreated from the original Final Fantasy VII and can provide a longtime fans with a nostalgic ride. These mounts provide a phenomenal immersion, especially if you are using a DualSense controller. So if you are using one, it is a nice bonus as well because of the haptic feedback's special features. Level design and exploration loop can be much appreciated when exploring the open world, but my experience or interaction with it has issues. The first thing that comes into mind is the clunky and janky movement feedback when interacting with terrain obstacles, especially when traversing rocky terrain. Although you might not see it in these clips that I'm showing you, but as soon as you get your hands on it, you will notice the terrain clunkiness right away. If you decide to complete open world activities, you will find yourself spending the majority of your time in exploration, so this issue can upset a lot of players. This is one of the major issues that I have so far, but you can get used to it over time, especially after you put in a lot of hours in the game. I'm hoping that this is one of the things that will be polished when Part 3 comes out. I also felt that few enemies can be encountered when exploring the world. In my opinion, increasing the enemy frequency a little bit will not hurt, since I also noticed that some of the areas are empty and it would be nice to fill in these gaps in the map. While open world exploration might be exciting, it's not for everyone. Players will be given the chance to focus on the main scenario alone without getting penalized and can always come back later on to complete any side content. There is no such thing as missables here, so that's a big relief, just in case you are wondering. Character customization and progression is no slouch either. Basic JRPG progression elements are present, like killing enemies, gaining experience points, and leveling up to have access to additional raw stats, or gain skill points to unlock special abilities or synergy abilities in character folios, which is one of the newly added character progression systems in Rebirth. Just like in any JRPG, players will have access to new weapons with varying stats or upgrades, or better armors with more material slots, which opens more character customization opportunities. Additionally, accessories often increase raw stats or grant access to special abilities. So there are going to be character building opportunities here. Plus, the users will have the ability to access different skills with different effects to match their playstyle, just like in the remake. Not to spoil the fun, but players will be able to master 7 characters. Each of them has their playstyle and mechanics. Knowing what each of them can offer to the table is one of the enjoyable aspects when forming your squad. One example would be Cloud, who specializes in slow but hard-hitting sword swings and can even be a counter monster, while Tifa can pull off quick punches and kicks with her martial arts abilities and outsmart her enemies with quick dodging maneuvers and devastating strikes. I played with all 7 characters, and I can say that Square Enix paid attention to each of the characters' mechanics, and just mastering each of them can provide anyone with more gameplay hours. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth excels in combat and is the best aspect of the game for many players, including myself. Rebirth's combat builds upon the already outstanding foundation of FF7 Remake while adding meaningful new layers of depth. Just like in the remake, combat revolves around pressuring enemies, filling the stagger gauge, and when the enemy is staggered, this is where the big chunks of damage comes in. Staple tactics remain, like aiming for the body parts and destroying them, weakening a boss, or pressuring them. If the already satisfying basic combat system is not enough, Square Enix doubled down on improving the experience further by adding synergy skills and synergy abilities. Skills and abilities that requires 2 or more party members to execute and provide various augments or buffs upon execution. Special augments such as unlimited MP, access to triple ATB charges, or even stagger extension. Not only does the whole synergy system adds another layer of mastery in combat, but I cannot stress how great looking the attack animations of the said synergy attacks and abilities are. Don't forget that players will still have access to their unique limit breaks, so that's another damage source and flair in combat. Tough and longer fights are usually where the combat shines the most, stacking regular attack combinations and abilities while juggling synergy skills and abilities, and finishing enemies with limit breaks can be rewarding and satisfying. With all that being said, imagine what boss battles would be like. Boss battles remain the highlight of the combat experience. Each boss brings unique mechanics and attack patterns that you'll need to learn and counter. Bosses in Rebirth aren't just your damage sponges, they're intricately designed encounters that require strategy and skill to overcome. Users are required to fulfill certain mechanics or exploit certain weaknesses before getting the upper hand in combat. A big bonus is the integration of combat cutscenes with the outstanding soundtrack creates truly epic moments that sticks with you. And oftentimes, these curated combat cutscenes heightens the battle, and believe me when I say that no other game does it better than Rebirth. Not to mention that the PC version's higher frame rates makes combat feel more responsive and fluid than ever, particularly during intense boss battles where frame rates can maintain 100 to 120 FPS at ultra settings. The overall difficulty, on the other hand, can be subjective. However, the consensus is the game is balanced, especially in normal difficulty, and this is where I stand as well. Grinding is not required, especially during the first playthrough, making the narrative intact. It could be demanding for players who are not used to action role-playing titles, and it is an absolute must for players to understand the combat mechanics to fare well in Rebirth. The most polarized aspect of Rebirth's gameplay is the plethora of minigames available in the game. I say polarized because fans have a different take on this subject. Some favor the amount of minigames available, but many despise it since it can be overwhelming, especially for players who love to complete almost everything during their first playthrough like myself. As you progress through later chapters, more activities become available in the open world, but the minigames pile up as well. Although the original Final Fantasy VII has a lot of minigames as well, I felt that there was no trophy system in the past, so people tended to just disregard the said minigames. But in today's landscapes, having the highest score in every minigame is part of getting 100% completion. And this is the reason why players notice the sheer numbers of minigames in Rebirth compared to the past. My take on this is I enjoy some of them, like the Fort Condor for example, or Queen's Blood. Most of the time, some of these minigames serves as a break from the main story. However, it can become too much if you are trying to complete everything at once, and I felt this, since I always make sure that I complete everything first in a certain region before going on to the next. Remember that minigames can be a totally separate thing aside from your general open world activities, which is already a ton. So I understand the sentiments about the minigames in general. If you're not like me and you just want to focus on the story, the good news is that about 90% of the minigames can be skipped if they're not your thing. But there's a minority that can be skipped and you need to participate. This is one of my major gripes since the majority of the side content can't be skipped, but why some can. Especially the Mughal minigame becomes extremely repetitive since you need to play it in every Mughal emporium in each region. But if you are into the said games, you will find your money's worth. Some minigames have surprising depth, allowing players to sink considerable time into mastering them. It is clear to see that Rebirth offers value on the table when it comes to its general gameplay. Because of this, it will have a solid 9.2 score for the overall gameplay. When it comes to technical performance, it is expected that the game receive a major overhaul when ported into PCs, so expect significant performance gains. However, it is far from perfect. To properly review the game's performance, I played with a system loaded with a Ryzen 9 7950X and an RTX 4090. Even having such a high-end system, the PC version's performance shows some inconsistencies that warrant detailed examination. This means that the game lacks 20 to 30% polish or optimization, which is part of the norm in recent years in gaming, and it is a saddening fact. In terms of performance, the game shows varying frame rates across different scenarios. In the open world, exploration typically runs between 90 to 100 FPS. It is saddening given the fact that the 4090 is capable of pushing the boundaries past 120 FPS. My settings are capped at 4K resolution in 120 FPS since my monitor is capped at 120 at the moment in ultra settings. Although I've seen noticeable improvements in frames per second ranging from 100 to 120 FPS when exploring the open spaces after the February 2025 performance update. Combat in the said areas maintains 80 to 100 FPS, while town shows mixed performance with busier areas dropping below 90 to 100 FPS and quieter sections reaching 100 to 105 FPS. Enclosed areas fare somewhat better, with general locations running at 90 to 100 FPS and occasionally hitting 120 FPS. Boss fights are mainly performing better, maintaining 100 to 120 FPS, though they can dip to 80 FPS during effect-heavy cutscenes. Other than that, there are some notable performance issues to consider, like stuttering significantly noticeable in Chapter 7 onwards. Since Rebirth already reached the PC platform, one silver lining in all of this is we can now use mods to improve the performance. I would highly suggest doing so since available mods can drastically improve performance and even fix the aforementioned stutters. With all that being said, the overall performance remains stable and I have never encountered any major crashes. As mentioned, it is expected that the PC version is miles ahead in terms of performance, especially when compared to the console version. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will receive an 8.5 score in terms of performance. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth offers massive value when it comes to replayability. My first playthrough took 81 hours with 90% world intel completion, but reaching 100% completion can easily push beyond 160 hours. The game provides numerous ways to extend your experience beyond the main story. Players can collect trophies and play arts to display at Johnny's Hotel, delve into character-related events and side stories that flesh out the world's narrative, and use a detailed play log system to track their progress across all activities. Those seeking additional challenges can master the various minigames and activities scattered throughout the world, while completionists will find plenty to do with enemy collections and world challenges that test their skills and dedication. Hardcore players will surely have plenty of ways to have fun in the game even after their first playthrough. Hard mode will be available and reward players with exclusive items or challenge the bonus simulator fights which host the hardest challenges in the game. While there's no traditional No Game Plus, hard mode presents a genuine challenge that requires fully optimized character builds to overcome. If you are a completionist, the $70 price tag can be justified. Even if you decide to explore and beat the main story once, 70 to 81 hours is worth the price. With this on the table, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will get a solid 9 score in the replayability department. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth stands a testament to Square Enix's commitment to quality. While it has some rough edges, particularly in story direction and technical performance, the overall package delivers an exceptional gaming experience. The combination of stunning presentation, engaging combat, and vast content make it a must-play for both newcomers and veterans alike. Whether you're a longtime fan or new to the series, Rebirth offers something special. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will be receiving a final score of 8.9 and will also receive a must-play award from my end. Every JRPG fan or newcomer in the series should give this game a chance, or you might develop a newfound love. We will eagerly wait for the third and final installment of this series and be there on release to watch how this iconic trilogy comes to its epic conclusion.